Hi, my name is Joel, and this is week 5. I thought since we'll be spending several months in the Gospels, it might be worth thinking about what a gospel really is, what kind of books these are. They're kind of a unique form of literature in the New Testament. They're not like the letters of Paul. They're certainly not like the book of Revelation. Even looking back into the Old Testament where we have more narrative, they still have a different flavor than books like Genesis or Samuel or Kings. When you look back at what the early church preached, look at the book of Acts, what was proclaimed in the church's earliest preaching was precisely this: the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So the preaching of the early church was indeed good news. Jesus is alive. Jesus is risen. What could be better news than this? Well, actually, we need to know a little bit more before we can hear this as good news, before we can hear it for what it really means. Because if we don't know who Jesus is, if we don't know anything about him, then we don't know what his resurrection means. We don't know if it's good news that he is alive, that his spirit is with us. The Gospels tell us who Jesus is. They identify him through stories, through narrative, through his teachings. We learn not only about what he taught, not only about what he did, but we learn, more importantly, about who he is. So the books we call the Gospels in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they are extended literary forms of this Christian proclamation. They tell us not only that Jesus died and was raised, but they also tell us who this Jesus is. So often I think we try to read ourselves into the text. We want to find out, are we living up to this example? Are we following this rule? Are we obeying this commandment? And these are important questions, but in doing so, we often miss the more important message that the gospel writers want to convey, namely, this is Jesus. Look at the kinds of things that he did. This is the same Jesus that is alive and with you today. This is the Jesus who gave you his Spirit. So my hope and my prayer as we continue our readings through this week is that we won't just read these stories for what they might mean for us, what we can take away and apply to our own lives, but that we actually encounter the one testified to in these writings, because this is the very same one who is with us today by his Spirit, the one who is alive. The gospel has no other Jesus to proclaim than the Jesus who is risen and who is present with us. And this is the Jesus who did the things that we read about in these stories, who taught the Sermon on the Mount, the Jesus who healed the sick and cleansed the lepers, the Jesus who loved the marginalized and the poor. This Jesus wants to meet us here in these words, and my prayer is that that is exactly what will happen this week.